In this video, we'll show you how we installed these curtains in Steve's TV room, which included making some notches in the trim around the doors, and installing these brackets, which can be a little bit finicky. Finally, we install the curtains, and even try stretching them to try and make them graze the floor. Let's get started. Steve picked out this drapery rod that can extend from 6 to 12 feet, and he picked gold because it goes with some of the other hardware that he picked out for the room. And these are interesting brackets because they don't have any visible screws. Instead, it has this little wedge that gets mounted to the wall and it slides onto that, which makes for a very clean look on the outside. But these aren't adjustable like many brackets tend to be. And here are the curtains he selected, which are 84 inches tall. And because this is for a TV room, he picked the 100% blackout version. And he had to buy 4 of these to span the doors. The first step is to figure out how high up we should mount the rod. So Steve has put one of the curtain panels on the rod and is holding it up against the wall so we can see how the bottom of the curtains interacts with the floor. Of course, there are several ways you can do this. Some people like to have it pool or puddle on the floor, others like it just grazing it, and others still like it floating an inch or less above the floor. And we're going for grazing here because Steve still wants it to be easy to clean around the curtains with the vacuum, while also blocking as much light as possible. With these 84-inch curtains, we're going to have these brackets embedded somewhere in the trim in order to have the curtains grazing the floor. And here you can see us testing out different heights. And this is the height that he liked best, which might be more floating than grazing. We could put this leftmost bracket to the left of the trim, but the other 2 brackets have to be in the trim anyway, so we're going to keep it symmetrical. My natural tendency would be to leave the trim alone, but this ends up looking pretty good, and you really won't see it anyway because of the way the curtains fold around the bracket. And thanks to this oscillating tool, cutting out this little notch is really easy. Holding the bracket up there gives us a little sneak peek of what it'll look like in the end. Here, this level is showing us that the trim is perfectly level, which means we can cut the next notches at that exact same line in the trim. For the central bracket, we're aligning it where the 2 doors meet, and using a combination square to make sure our cut lines are straight up and down. And that one fits nicely as well. Of course, we follow the same procedure for the bracket on the right. Because we've cut these notches in the trim to be the exact same width as our brackets, we need to make sure we're putting those wedge-shaped mounting blocks exactly in the middle. Hence, the careful measuring. As you can see, these brackets have an up side, so the narrow part goes up top and the wider part at the bottom. With it slid all the way into the bracket, you can see there's a 3/16 inch gap or so at the bottom. So that's why Steve's holding 2 little pieces of cardboard as a spacer to make sure this mount is at the right height. And here he's noticing that there's a change in level on the wall between the painted and unpainted part that was behind the trim. And you'll see how that complicates things a little bit shortly. And here we have both of the screw holes for the mount marked on the wall. The kit comes with these screws and drywall anchors, but we drilled into the wall with a very small drill bit to verify that there was indeed wood behind the drywall. Which of course means we don't need to use the drywall anchors. And in fact, if you do, which we did try in one spot, the tip of the drywall anchor ends up just hitting the wood, and all you end up doing is boring out a large hole in the drywall. And we didn't see that much wood come out in the drill, so here we're putting in a screw just to test. And sure enough, Steve can feel the resistance of the wood once it gets deep enough. Finally, we're ready to screw in one of these mounting plates. And again, make sure the narrow side is up and that you can read the word up that's printed on the plate. Here we're tightening down the screws pretty hard, and you'll see why you might not want to do that in a second. As Steve slides on the bracket, it starts to bind at the trim, and he sees that that part is actually cut at an angle, so he straightens it up with the oscillating tool. Then he tries again, but it's still getting jammed up. And this is when we realized we had to loosen off those screws. Over tightening them just pulls that mounting plate into the drywall, and with that change in level between the painted and unpainted parts of the wall, it just takes up that minimal wiggle room that there is between the mounting plate and the bracket. So finally, after a few adjustments of these screws, we got the bracket all the way in. And it does look really nice. And of course, we followed the same process for the other 2 brackets until we had all 3 of them up. This curtain rod comes in 3 pieces, with a slightly narrower one joining the 2 wider ones. And that's how you're able to adjust it between 6 and 12 feet long. Once you get them in, you can hold them in place with these little screws that can just be hand tightened. On the left side, we thought the curtain rod should extend about 6 inches beyond the trim. But of course, that's up to your own personal taste. And here, the level is confirming that we hung this curtain rod well. Now we have to take apart the rods to put on the curtains. And although Steve was putting 3 of the eyelets or grommets of the curtain on first, before the bracket, in the end, we only put on 1 before having the curtain wrap around the bracket and continue down the rest of the rod. We're doing this on the curtain panels on either end of the doors, because spanning that bracket helps keep that one side of the curtain aligned with the edges of the door and trim. For the 2 center panels, we just slide it onto the rod without spanning any bracket, and this allows it to be moved the full distance between the outer bracket and the center bracket. And perhaps here you can see more clearly how Steve has put all but one of the grommets of the curtain onto the rod, then threads the rod through the bracket, and finally through the last grommet of the curtain. Then we slide that inner rod into this larger rod until there's at least a couple feet inside, since this span is probably only 7 feet of the 12 feet that the rods can cover. With all the curtains up, we can see they're a little higher than we wanted and seem to get higher on the right side despite the rods supposedly being level. So we took down each panel and tried to stretch them out a little bit by pulling between each grommet and the bottom of the curtain. And this did help quite a bit. As you can see, it went from about 1 1/4 inches over the floor to just under 1 inch. And the final touch is installing the finial on the left side. And we don't have one on the right because the curtain rod goes straight into the wall. And that's the curtains installed. And it's amazing how quickly it transforms the look of the room, which Steve is turning into his TV room. So if you like videos like this, you might like this one here, where we're installing these slatted wood acoustic wall panels.